What's good, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of the 3M Talk Show. Will be more of a law-centered podcast. I have Mrs. Loli Sharma with me here. She's done a degree in civil law from Oxford. Am I right? Um,
Called
how
a
was that?
civil, but it's not really a civil law degree. It's just a law degree.
How was that? How
It
was the
was a great
experience?
it was a great experience. I had a blast simply because it was a
Hmm.
great experience trying to understand how to actually think about subjects as opposed to learning the subjects. So there's a lot of focus here on what the law says and how do you interpret what it says and things like that. But what they did teach us at Oxford, which was very, very nice, was questioning whether something should be written the way it is and whether that is
Hmm.
correct. So it sort of employs a different muscle of not just understanding what is written on paper, but also questioning whether it's the right thing or not.
Hmm.
And
So
that critical
basically,
is it's a good skill to have.
it's more practical when it comes to the functioning of law. It teaches you how law functions. Something like that.
Yes and no, because it does teach you how law functions, but that even
Hmm.
the elsewhere does. I think this is also about understanding why law is the way it is and why you create different kinds of laws the way that they exist right now. So it's sort of like going back to the basics to think about it from the perspective of the drafters of laws and why they
Hmm.
do things the way they do and what dictates the final statute in the way that it comes out.
Hmm. I'll ask you this question separately. Before that, I want to ask you, like, how did you, like, what motivated you to become a lawyer? How can, like, someone become a lawyer in the first place, especially in
Uh,
this country?
that's that's a very deep
Because
question.
I think, like, compared to the previous decade, I think lawyers are taken more seriously in this country now. Were they always taken that seriously? Or was law as a profession always taken that seriously? I think that it's taken more seriously now. And
No, absolutely right. I mean, you're right. It's definitely
yeah,
taken more in this decade than it was in the previous decades. I don't know why that was the case though, because it sort of so traditionally, I think if you go back to the
Modi ji,
roots, nahi,
Modi ji is the reason.
Modi ji, but go back to the roots of how law started as a profession.
Hmm.
So, litigation was the only form of law that was practiced primarily. When I say
Hmm.
litigation, I basically refer to going to a court and representing a person in a court of law. That was the only form of law that was
Hmm.
recognized.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, that's very financially intensive in the first couple of years, which means that you won't be making too much money in the first couple of years. You'll probably act as an apprentice to an existing established lawyer, and
Hmm.
they'll probably not pay you much, which is unfortunately still the case. It shouldn't be the case because people are pulling their weight, they're actually putting in work and the hours to demand a higher salary. But that's not the case. Junior lawyers earn very, very little, especially if it's a litigation kind of a situation where you have to go to court. The rationale behind it, at least that was given by older lawyers, was that हम आपको पैसे कम देंगे because हम आपको सिखा भी रहे हैं कि लॉ कैसे करते हैं. And वो तो ठीक है एक तरीके से it's a good thing. I mean that they're teaching you, but that teaching results in abysmally low salaries, which cannot sustain you for a very
Hmm.
long time. So आपका and over a period of time, when you make your own clients, you start making money, and then there's no end to how much money you can make through that.
Hmm.
But so that's why I think you either had to be financially very, very rich to be able to do law, or you had to be one of those jugadu people who knew how to get stuff done, which is also a huge part of the culture here in India, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, and I'm not saying this, I'm saying this with all due respect, okay? And we've come a long way.
Hmm.
But when things, the way they've evolved, earlier a lot
You
used to
don't have to
function.
speak that carefully. Nobody is watching this podcast.
Yeah,
It's the second episode. But
yeah,
anyway.
but still, like, if about it. So it was a lot about who did you know in the system and how will you get
Yeah.
stuff done. And for
Mm.
that, I have to come from a very rich, financially rich background where your parents can support you, or you have, family who is already in law and they have existing clients who they can pass on to you.
Mm.
Because making clients is also not easy, right? Think about it. 10 years ago, who went to court? I don't think as a population all of
Right.
us had money to spare to actually take a case to court, and those who did, they knew that the outcome will be severely delayed. This unfortunately has not changed, but still, given the amount of commerce that the country is seeing, and after the opening up of the economy, there's been so much more litigation on the commercial side. But pehle, there used to be a lot of property disputes, industrial disputes. There used to be a lot of, very few matters otherwise. So property, constitution, criminal, these used to be the only cases that were
Mm.
majorly litigated. So
Mm.
that was the mindset, at least at that point in time. So that in itself created a bottleneck, right? It's an entry barrier for people to consider law as a career. And not too many
Mm.
people thought that it's the right profession, given the number of jugadu people and given the number of stability that you needed to enter law as a career. Now, cut to like this,
Mm.
the I think 15 years or maybe 20 years or so, you had the advent of the national law schools. Now, these were like the
Mm.
IIT, right? They were premier institutes for law studies, and they sort of were the tipping point for creating great legal education in the country. And along
Yep.
with that, it sort of coincided with the opening up of the economy in the 90s. And then, you also had these companies coming in. So the commercial law side of things also opened up, which is conveyancing,
Mm.
which is where you create the
Mm.
legal documents which later get litigated in a court of law. So now that
Mm.
just increased the avenues manifold, right? It's not just going to court anymore. It's also the commercial side of things, and it's also working for companies who need lawyers. So because of that, I think A, the quality of legal education improved in the country, and B, the number of job opportunities and the nature of jobs you could get post getting a legal education also changed dynamically. So I think together
Mm.
all of led to just, I think, this whole like tidal wave of law being looked at as a profession
Lobbying. Yep.
considered by a
Yeah.
large.
Mm.
So
Um.
mm.
Plus, I feel like isn't it more related to lawyers earning a lot more? But
Oh,
I think both reasons are interrelated. Like that happens because of that.
yeah, you're right, I think, in saying that. I think just the fact
Yeah.
that more job opportunities got created for lawyers, plus more companies coming into India, more commerce, all of that
Mm.
led to salaries increasing exponentially for lawyers. And law, even world over, is one of those professions where, for some odd reason, the salaries have always been pretty great. Except, of
Mm.
course, if you're going to
Because you
court.
need lawyers at the end of the day.
I mean, knowing the law of the land is important for everyone
Yeah.
because
Mm.
as a civilization, as a
Mm.
society, it helps you understand how you cannot
Mm.
live your life, and
Mm.
boundaries of how you should live your life. Sorry, I take that back. Boundaries of how you should live your life. Plus, what are your rights? It also sort of enlightens you
Yeah.
about what cannot get. So it's important for people to know the law, but at the same time, I don't think more lawyers means more progress necessarily. I don't think those two are correlated.
Um. Yeah. Like I mean, you need engineers also. You need everyone. But I think more legal education maybe means more
More
progress because.
people, yeah, for people for sure, because not only does the law give people a very good
Mm.
understanding of where the society is headed, because law is nothing but a
Mm.
reflection of the society is functioning at that point in time, but it also
Mm.
gives you an idea of is this the right direction? So that critical thinking
Yeah.
of how the changing and do
Yeah.
we want to change that way. It also gives you a
Mm.
minute like insight into that, and sometimes that is very important to gauge whether you're comfortable living in a
Mm.
particular
Mm.
society or country and things like that. And if you
Mm.
think about it, like when we um, you don't necessarily, I mean, it's somehow also like in general knowledge, which is good to have. So when you think about moving to a particular country, say, you think about what the taxation looks like there. That's also dictated via laws, you know, in that
Mm,
country.
mm,
The immigration process is again driven by law.
mm,
Then you think about what are the benefits that the government is offering you, the social security benefits,
mm,
again law.
mm,
So indirectly, it's just basically a reflection of the society. So it becomes
mm,
very important to have that knowledge or yourself with that knowledge, just
mm.
as to exist in the
Yeah.
society. But yeah, but I don't think more lawyers is more progress for sure.
Um, but like, uh, are the rumors true about like the richest lawyers of this country earning like up to like 1 CR a day?
Oh yeah, for sure. So again, like I
Yeah.
said, like it's a gamble when you go to court and
Does
you
that mean
argue.
that is it that in litigation, which is basically fighting a case, going in a court and fighting a case, the visual representation of law for a lot of people is, does that mean that litigation is a better source to earn money on an overall, or like is it more like when you reach a certain like top status in litigation, then it's available to you? Obviously that's the case, but like on an average, I think commercial law pays you more.
I don't know. It's very hard to say. It's really hard to say because litigation is a
Mm.
gamble. If you decide to go to court and
Yeah.
a lawyer that is actually in the truest sense of the word, for the people and defending
Mm.
people for clients, then in that case, it really depends. Your initial few years are going to be very tough because until probably year 9 or year 10 of your career, you'll be working towards
Mm.
gaining trust with clients and getting clients
Mm.
of your money only really starts coming in once you have
Yeah.
clients who are willing to keep coming back to you. And I
Mm.
think the other thing is, how much trust have you been able to build in the judiciary? Because think about it, all of the judges also, to some extent,
Mm.
love listening to certain lawyers because they're very, very good with their arguments. And they actually add to legal literature because their arguments are so nuanced. They actually go into the specifics, the explaining
Mm.
is done.
Mm.
It creation of new law sometimes. And that happens when the lawyer that you've employed is stellar. So I think you also
Mm.
have to only have the talent and the knack to be able to do that, to just be
Mm.
able to do and be articulate in court in that pressure within a limited period of time. But you also have to be able to build trust with people that you are a good lawyer. So that
Mhm.
trust will help you earn clients. So I think it's a combination of all of that. And if you manage to do that, then in that case the money is exponential. There is no limit to how much you can earn, provided like you have the
Mm.
time in the day to actually see clients. But on the other side, if you're a person who doesn't want to take so much risk, because you invest like 5, 10, 8 good years of your career where you have the maximum energy, the maximum zeal to learn, and if it doesn't pay off for whatever reason,
Mm.
like you're not able to sort of handle the pressure of the number of cases that are happening at the same time, or you're not able to build clients or get
Mm.
clients, so that, I think, then in that case commercial law is safer because that there's a
Mm.
stable that comes with it. And
Mm.
if you're working in a law firm, then a partnership track probably, and things like that. But if you don't want to take the risk, then yeah, then commercial law is the much much more safe option that
Mm.
way. But it also depends on your interests, right? Like, because the thing is, I feel like
Mm.
litigation take
True.
a lot, in addition to intellectual labor, a lot of physical labor
Mm.
also, because you have to go to
Yeah,
court
because you have
every.
to go to court every day, not every day, sort of every day, on every date, and like you have to do a lot of things. You have
Yeah,
to carry files and all. So,
yeah, and it's
mm,
also like
yeah.
court, and most of it is just waiting around for your matter to come, right? So
Mm.
it's taxing, and then you have to come back and prepare
Mm.
for the next matter. So literally
Yeah.
coming back to your office at 4 5 p.m, and you have, that's most when most people leave office, but you have to start work for the next day. So it's also very
Mm.
very demanding as a career. You will probably also have to spend like your Sundays reading for your matters on Monday and prepping for them.
Hmm.
If there's urgent filing that has to happen, then you're prepping for it Saturday and Sunday. So it's intensive.
Hmm. Got it. Is it the same in UK? Like, is litigation, um, like you said, in India, a lot of people think that law basically means litigation. It's basically when you associate the word law, it basically means that you're going to a court and fighting a case. Is it different around the world? Or like is it a new phenomenon where people are talking about commercial law and all of these things?
No, no, I don't think it's a new
It's
phenomena.
Yeah,
I
so it's
think
new for India.
not really. I mean, I would say it always
Hmm.
existed, but people just didn't recognize it as a source of
Because of
revenue.
Bollywood?
Yeah, Hollywood definitely, as you know. Tariq pe Tariq, wo
Because of
pe-
Jolly LLB and Tariq pe Tariq.
हाँ, पे Tariq याद आते हैं. So I
um, why I
tag.
ask you that is like I want to know that what is like basically differences in the core ideology of Indian laws and foreign laws, um, of like democratic countries. Like, firstly, we have this presidential and parliamentary debate. Like, certain governments are presidential, some are parliamentary. I want you to break that down too. And basically, what is the core difference in the uniqueness in Indian law? Like,
That
what I want to know is the uniqueness in Indian law and how like Indian law makes it itself different from like basically foreign laws. And like, are there any ideological differences between like Indian laws and other democratic parliamentary countries, their laws?
um there. So the thing is, world over. Let me put it
Mm.
this way: world over, I think there are two kinds of laws which are primarily existent. One is civil law.
Yeah.
There is common law. So,
Mm.
common law is the law which was primarily coming from the British times. So, Britishers had colonies across the globe, right? And they started like enforcing common law in all of those colonies. So, any
Mm.
form of which was created in in a colony, so to speak, in the olden times, the
Mm.
British,
Mm.
that had um, that had a reflection of what was the British law at that time. So you'll see,
Yeah.
you'll see
Mm.
traces in like 90% of it being almost English law in some senses, whether it be property law, whether it be your criminal procedure, your penal codes, all of it was like structured according to the UK law at that time. And that's the
Mm.
same for most countries which had common law rules. So, like in Australia, some countries in Africa, all of these countries will have probably similar ideals and principles which they follow, with minor changes which are based on the country that was being governed. And then law is the civil law, which is what is followed in certain countries. Like for example, France has civil law, which is very different
Mm.
from common law. Then you have US, which has civil law, which is very different from common
So
law. But
basically, common law is meant for like Commonwealth countries. Is that
countries,
so?
yeah, that's true.
Break it down for me.
I don't know how to break it down further, but the legal principles are somewhat borrowed
Okay.
from
Mm.
law. But of
Got it.
course, it's
Yeah.
depending on the country that you're dealing with. So, for example,
Mm.
the Constitution of India is a document which is very unique to India, because it was
Mm.
created by something called the Constituent Assembly, which was established just before partition to work on creating the
Mm.
constitution, the core body of rules for governance of India. So that,
Mm.
if you
Got
look
it.
at, very different but borrowed from other countries as well. And there's
Mm.
there's this beautiful document. The document kya matlab, it's multiple series of books which contain the debates of the Constituent Assembly. So basically, what was the members of the Constituent Assembly, what were they thinking when they drafted the Constitution of
Yeah.
India? What did they debate
Mm.
upon? What were the nuances? So that is what
Mm.
incorporates primary rights as a citizen. So your right to life,
Mm,
your right to speech and expression, all of these things which you call the fundamental rights of any citizen in India, all of
mm,
those are
mm,
incorporated. Functioning of the parliament, how should that be conducted? What should the president
mm,
do? What is the state legislature legislating on? Those subjects are
mm,
segregated. What can the center legislate on or the central government legislate on? That is segregated. So that forms the
mm,
backbone. That is distinct for each country because so at some level every country is a sovereign by itself. What that means is
mm,
that it is its own free entity by itself, and it has the power to
mm,
dictate its own rules. So every country
mm.
therefore has its own constitution, which is the core of its lawmaking, and then other laws sort of fall umbrella. It's the umbrella law. Other laws sort of fall under it depending on whether they're state subjects or central subjects, the state government legislating on it or the central government legislating on it.
Got it.
But
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah. Uh, Law of torts is part of civil laws, right?
not really. It's part of both common and civil law because law of
Okay.
torts is really, if you think about it, it's very basic like day to day law, right? That which is part of
Mm,
law of torts. So it forms part of both civil and criminal. Sorry, civil and common law because you can't live
mm,
without that. Thing as basic as suing someone for something like defamation. That is part
mm.
of any law. So that
Yeah,
it
yeah.
there.
Got it. Mm. Last question. Last question. What were the recent three Lok Sabha criminal laws which were like legislated? I know a
Mm.
thing or two about them, but I got to know about it from YouTube shorts, so I can't trust them. So I want you to tell me
I also
what were
don't
the
know.
three Lok Sabha
I
criminal
won't claim,
laws?
I won't claim to know the details, frankly, because it's a very lengthy piece of
Um,
legend,
yeah,
and
yeah.
we are still
But like
reading
sum
it.
it up though. Sum it up.
Most lawyers around the country are still trying to sort of read it and make sense of it. But
Mm-hmm.
so like I said, when the Britishers were around, they created regulations for us. So most of the laws, like for example, the Criminal Procedure Code, the Indian Penal Code, and along with that, your Evidence Act. All of these were created way back in
Mm,
1860s and 1850s when the Britishers were here. They haven't
mm,
changed since then. So what the
mm.
government just now was create a new penal code, a new criminal procedure act, a new
Yep.
evidence act for India right now. Now, in the older version of these legislations, of course, there was no internet at that point in time.
Mm,
So there was
yeah.
no space or there was no room for it. So let me just take a step back and explain what these are. So the Evidence
Yeah.
Act basically dictates how evidence should be, what can be considered as evidence, and how it can be placed before a court of law and or in an inquiry which is happening pertaining to a particular case,
Mm, mm,
criminal or a civil proceeding. So what is evidence in that context? It
mm,
provides rules of what can be, cannot be regarded as
mm,
evidence. That's the Evidence Act, and that has
mm.
been replaced by what is now, it was earlier called the Indian Evidence Act. It's now called the Bharatiya Sakshya. That's what it's called now.
Bharatiya Sakshya. Okay.
Then the second legislation which underwent a change is the Indian Penal Code. So the Indian
Mm,
Penal Code basically describes what exactly is classified as an offense and what is the punishment for that offense. What are the kinds of offenses? How do you punish people for them? That's the Indian Penal Code. And as the name suggests, penal, penalty related. So
yeah.
now it's been replaced with
IPC.
IPC, correct, correct.
Yeah.
That's
Mm,
lawyers usually refer to it. Now it has been replaced with what is called the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita Bill. Not Bill Act
mm,
now, but Bharatiya Nyaya
mm.
Sanhita. That
Okay.
is, yeah, the Indian Penal Code. And third is the Criminal Procedure Code, which is, like
Mm,
the name suggests, it's called the CRPC, which basically provides the procedure to be followed in case there is a criminal trial that is ongoing.
mm, Mm.
that has been replaced with what is now called the Bharatiya Suraksha Sanhita. These names are very difficult to pronounce, and I'm sorry, I'm like, this is going to sound controversial because we all know Hindi, right? And I was a very good Hindi student, but even then, this is difficult. So, this,
You
it,
sound like you came back from Oxford, but yeah,
no,
go on.
no, I don't mean this from a place of, hey, I've come back from Oxford, very Hindi weak है. मेरी हिंदी बहुत अच्छी थी
Mm.
स्कूल में,
Mm.
both written
हाँ,
and spoken
हाँ,
Hindi,
हाँ,
but
हाँ.
that's still a tongue twister, right? From
Mm.
IPC to Bharatiya
Yeah, I
Sakshar,
mean, it's
it's
so
hard.
complicated. Sanskrit words, yeah.
It's hard. We could have
Mm.
gone with our names, I think. But anyway, what we
Yeah.
basically do is it's mostly the old law packaged in the form that New India needs it, I guess, with some changes to incorporate internet based offenses and what can be regarded as internet based offenses, what will be an evidence in case of an internet based offense. They also talk about defamation. The laws on defamation and sedition in the old British era were very draconian because they provided for wide powers for the government to punish people on grounds of defamation, on grounds of sedition, because the Britishers were very, very scared about what Indians would do if they were not
Yeah. Yeah. They
treated.
had to make harsh laws for defamation. Yeah.
Correct, correct. But surprisingly, these provisions continue almost as is,
Mm.
even in current law. They
Mm.
haven't been modified. Then that's about it. I think that summarizes the major changes that have happened. And in the Evidence Act, also, it talks about now electronic and digital records and what can be considered electronic and digital records. How do you take evidence in case of digital offenses?
Mm.
Then the categories of offenses which have been laid out, especially sedition through your posts online,
Mm.
which can happen through spreading misinformation on WhatsApp, on other online
Mm.
channels. Sorry, I'm saying WhatsApp out. I didn't mean to, but that was the first thing that came to my mind because
Yeah.
the basically that's in a nutshell. I think that's what primarily changes. Along with this,
Mm.
there was the telecom law, which also underwent a change in the recent parliament session. That's also a very interesting one because it provides for regulation for internet companies as well, and OTT platforms or over the top services. So
Mm.
your apps of the world could potentially get regulated and licensed under that regime. There are severe penalties and also severe compliances for these companies which have been laid out in the law, which basically include sort of uh, content takedown notices which can go to them, and the government has the power to take possession of the electronic equipment from which these posts are being made or from where the information is being generated. They have the power to prevent the
Mm.
dissemination of certain kinds of messages if they deem
So
fit to be.
basically, the government will be in more control of content
Yes,
in
yes,
the
yes,
country.
yes.
Mm. Okay.
The reason I'm saying no is because the government definitely has the power to do all of this under the new law, but how that
Yeah.
power will be enforced will become clearer through rules which have to be enacted under that act, and the rules haven't come as
Mm.
of date. So
Okay.
wait and watch and see how that
Mm.
evolves.
Got it.
Thing to
Mm.
watch out because
Mm.
uh, yeah, it'll be interesting because if for us, we've seen the world through the lens
Mm.
of the internet the last decade or more. That's going to change now, and I don't know how,
Mm.
but because so the only reason in at least a decade ago, if you think about it, a decade ago, a similar debate was happening in
Mm.
Europe and UK, where they have very strong laws on these topics. So in Europe and UK, a
Mm.
decade ago, when they were talking about how the media, which is sort of like the fourth pillar of the government, right?
Mhm.
How media should be regulated. At that
Mm.
point in time, they felt like it should not be regulated too much because that leads to what is referred to as a chilling effect, which basically means that people will be scared to say certain things, and
Mm.
that will lead to criticism, critiquing dying down. So if
Mm.
there is no voice that the people have through media, or if there is no one critiquing the government can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So that is why these laws were kept light. But over
Mm.
a period, not only have offenses on the internet increased, but also there's definitely a need to regulate it a little more. But I feel like overarching laws which are very broad in scope may lead to this chilling effect, sort of curbing the kind of free content we see on the internet right now.
Hmm.
Having just speculation that I'm basing my opinions on. We'll have to wait and see how this pans out. But there's definitely an indication that there's definitely like there's definitely literature to suggest that this is one of those bad outcomes which could result from over-regulation. But whether this is over-regulation or not, again, only time will tell, and we'll have to wait to see how the
Hmm. Interesting. Thank you so much. You've spoken a lot. And thank you so much putting all your knowledge into work on this podcast. I really appreciate it. Um, and whenever in the future, when there'll be a lot of viewers, I'll do another episode with you, and hopefully we'll get the better of it.
room.
And thank you so much. See
We
you
look
around
for
in the next
fun.
episode.
Okay. Thank you so
Um,
much.
that's it.